Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning, Grant. Good morning, Rusty. Good morning, listeners.
I was just looking at this short position on Bitcoin, and this really caught my eye. So I don't know if you've had a chance to dig into this at all, Lucas. But watching the price of Bitcoin has been pretty interesting for me over the last couple weeks because it seems like what's happening is we'll see some volatility in Bitcoin, and I really expect to see volatility in Bitcoin. If you look historically, you'll see that Bitcoin has a pretty wide range in price. You'll see it go up, you'll see it tank. You kind of see a lot of variance. But what we've been seeing lately is the price of Bitcoin will have this like relative stability. It'll just like hit this price and it'll almost pin to it, which is fascinating. And then when I came across this guy talking about Bitcoin having a lot of short interest, it really caught my eye because I really couldn't understand what I was seeing in the price chart. So I think what might be interesting is to pull up the price chart and I'll show you what I've been seeing, and then we can maybe talk through a bit more about what we've been seeing as far as what might be happening with some of the price action in Bitcoin, as well as whatever else you got on your mind, Lucas. But that's what's been on my mind. It's just what's really going on with the price of Bitcoin. And I thought that this particular video seemed like a pretty interesting place to start.
I definitely want to hear your explanation of what's going on here. I had not. I thought maybe it would be interesting also to get your take on the the matrices less um, LLM models and what that might mean, like relying on the kernel instead of a matrices layer for LLMs. That's sort of the rabbit hole that I went down this morning. I was also before I got into our group chat was I don't know if you saw Idaho and water issues going on in there. That was if we have time for any like political goings on in the United States, which I think also has broader implications for like political control of electricity. We talk about that with regards to blockchains and consensus. But I think it's something interesting going on in Idaho with regards to their water rights. Um, that's what's on my mind this morning. Rusty, what about you?
Oh, it's just another great morning. I've been watching the charts and looking over the numbers. It's interesting to see what's been going on lately, especially as you look at the different chains. But I'm interested to see where Luke, what Grant was talking about just now with the shortings of Bitcoin, so we can get started there.
All right, well, Grant, hit it. Tell us. I see you got the chart up. What is going on with Bitcoins and shorts on Bitcoin?
Well, take a look at this right here. Okay, so see what's happening is that this is particularly the thing that has caught my eye that has been happening with some regularity. See how it's just like rock solid on this price? This is way abnormal, like not to be expected. Like you typically expect to see stuff like this where it like goes down, kind of goes up, down, whatever. There's volatility. Like it is very common in Bitcoin for this to happen, but we've been seeing this kind of stuff happening with some regularity. See, you can see it here and you can see it here, where it just kind of pins to a price. That I am not used to seeing at all. And I watch the price of Bitcoin with pretty close eye. This is something I think that if you followed this show, you've heard Aleph talk about RSI and MACD. This is something bullish and A1 have talked about with some regularity. So this is a good way to look at various assets. So these are the relative strength indexes, and it basically says if something is oversold or overbought. And so what you're seeing here is just like it's sitting like dead in the middle of a trading range, which is saying it's not oversold, it's not overbought, and the volume has hit this really low trough too. And then the price just pretty much stays pegged at 69,000. And so that's where this whole analysis came in from this guy. And so I think in here, yeah, he's got this chart, and I'll just pause it right there. Is basically saying that there has been a short position which has been developed by the hedge funds, that they are just massively short. So I think the way I read this chart is this red says how much are they short Bitcoin, and you can see that they have just become massively short this Bitcoin over the last little while. And what he's claiming is this is roughly where the launch of the ETFs were. And so the ETFs have been gobbling up Bitcoin. I mean, at a furious pace. If you've been keeping track of what's been going on with the ETFs, they have just been massively buying Bitcoin, but yet we have not seen any kind of face melting rip on Bitcoin. And a lot of people have been like, hey, what is going on here? Why is it that we never seem to be able to get above 70,000? So if you kind of zoom way out on the chart, you can see that anytime we get anywhere near 70,000, we just immediately fall right off of it. Anytime we get near that price, it somehow always falls back. So this is kind of back in the beginning of the year when, or of last year at least. So this is early last year when the price was around 40,000, and it was when the ETFs were first announced, and so that pretty much priced in over the next little while. So you can kind of see it going up. And then what happens is we can never get above 70,000. And so it's this guy's claim that what has been going on is that there has been a pretty massive short position which has been developed in Bitcoin, which is an extremely interesting contemplation. If you've been listening to this show on like what can happen when a massive short position is built up on any asset. Now, the thing that's different here versus something like GameStop is Bitcoin does not allow you to create new Bitcoin just on the fly. The only way new Bitcoin can be created is by its normal emissions rate. And we're not creating that much new Bitcoin. So when you develop a short position like this, at some point you need to close these, or who's ever borrowing you the Bitcoin, they're going to go out of business. So one of two things is going to happen. Either these guys are going to have to go out on the market and buy this Bitcoin, or whoever loaned them the Bitcoin that they sold is going to get screwed because they will no longer be able to go collect it from wherever they borrowed it to. So this is not like the stock market in any way. So if there are hedge funds that are playing this game in Bitcoin, I don't think it's going to turn out the same way that it will in something like GameStop, because GameStop has just been creating new shares with some regularity. I think they actually increased the total amount of shares by 25%. So they, I think, had something like 250 million shares, and now they've gone up to 420 million. So they've created new shares that have bled off some of the pressure from the shorts. But in Bitcoin, this is not possible. So we'll have to see how this plays out, because it could be pretty interesting if this guy Luke Mikic is right about what's been happening with the Bitcoin sort of situation.
And maybe to back off from this from a little bit, like, do you think this is happening because hedge funds, private equity groups have been playing, or I should say, like, groups with a lot of capital have been playing this short game, manipulating the market, making money on those shorts with regular stocks, with other volatile assets, and they think that it's going to play out the same with Bitcoin. Is that what you would guess is happening here?
70,000 seems to be kind of a magic number on Bitcoin. It's near the all-time high. So it's a price that has had a pretty high resistance. So, in all asset trading, there's this concept of you can have resistance levels. So a price where the stock really shouldn't go above it. So I think if you look at something like Nvidia, people thought that there was going to be a pretty strong resistance at 1200, and it just ripped right past 1200, which just shocked everyone because it meant that Nvidia now is the most valuable company in the world, which had not been anticipated, I think, by a lot of people. And it does play into a question that you asked me just a few minutes ago, which was what is going on with LLMs and what might happen here. So what's interesting is obviously technology keeps moving forward, and people can have developments and things can happen at any point. And so we'll get into that maybe in a little bit, but this idea that there are price resistance levels, NVIDIA, there was this idea that 1200 would be a resistance level. And so some people were betting against that price and got absolutely wrecked because it kind of ripped past 1200. And so on Bitcoin, the resistance level has been something around 72,000. Like it's really not breached that level. And anytime it breaches 72,000, it comes back pretty fast. You see a sell off happen. And that's, you can sometimes see that with this RSI or the MACD is what can happen is when it breaches 72,000, oftentimes you'll see it come above the relative strength indicator. And if that happens, then you usually see a pretty massive sell-off, which has been tracking pretty well. Anytime we get near the all-time high, it sells off pretty hard. So that's been a strong resistance level. But the idea here might be that the reason this is happening is because every time it gets near that point, the hedge funds that are playing against Bitcoin and thinking that Bitcoin is going to massively go down have been shorting it at that point. But that really can't go on for too much longer because there's only so much Bitcoin to go around. And on a short position in a crypto asset, you have to have the asset. You can't just short it and then say you have it and not have it, unless you're playing some kind of game like FTX or some centralized exchange or something like that. So it may be that this is kind of gamesmanship that's happening that has been contributing to the price. But if this is playing out the way it's supposed to on an actual blockchain, then you wouldn't be able to do this for too much longer. Otherwise, you're going to exhaust the supply of Bitcoin that you have the ability to go out on the open market and borrow from people. And then at some point, they're going to want their Bitcoin back. And the very unfortunate thing with borrowing out Bitcoin that users of at least Celsius have found is that sometimes when you borrow your Bitcoin out, it can take you a long time to get it back. And oftentimes you get it back at a significant haircut, where you may be loaned out 20 Bitcoin or, 10 Bitcoin and you only get back 3 or 2 because whoever you borrowed it to ends up insolvent or bankrupt or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out if he ends up being right, because it's not it shouldn't behave the same way that the stock market does, because the stock market can do some pretty crazy stuff with naked short selling and market makers and stuff like that really shouldn't exist in crypto.
A couple of weeks ago, months ago, maybe, Aleph and I were talking on the morning show. I don't know if you were there, but I asked him like why hedge fund managers didn't pay more attention to M4 or M5, like broad definitions of the supply of money, because it would seem to me that that they would be very concerned about that with their predictions. And he was a little bit taken aback. I was surprised because he was like, oh, they never pay attention to that. And so I've wondered since then. We also live in a world, like we talk about Blackstone, we talk about the erasure between both investment banks, but also Basel III's rules, like putting more things like houses, land, property into banks, like calculation of their capital. And so I've wondered if that was going to open up the things like the stock market, which seems to have had more restrictions on how money came into it before, or how dollars came into it before. So I've wondered. I mean, we're printing trillions and trillions of dollars in debt right now, or trillions and trillions of dollars, no matter where it comes from. So I've wondered if some of the traditional methods of keeping that cordoned off and out of the narrative of what capitalism looks like have been eroded. So it will be interesting to see if they get liquidated with these short positions. What happens there, and if Bitcoin? I mean, I've also thought that for quite some time, and much too early on my predictions, that Bitcoins would be worth lots and lots and lots of dollars, and I'm surprised, so many years later that it's only $70,000. Um, uh,
Well,
any
there are strong price predictions that are saying that the price of Bitcoin should this year go to something like a $500,000, and there are price predictions for Bitcoin that say it should be a million by 2030. That's those are bold statements, in my opinion. It's like that's a big jump. That's huge. Like that's a 7x from where we're at. If we go to 500,000, and if we go to a million, that's that's face ripping, increase in price of Bitcoin. But honestly, if we're pricing it in dollars, like you've said, we are printing dollars in the metaphorical sense. Obviously, we're not talking about the real printing press here. We're talking about creating more dollars in the monetary supply. If that is occurring, as you and I have discussed in the past, and that we're continuously seeing, then you would expect to see the price of Bitcoin go up substantively, because this is, an elastic supply meeting an inelastic supply. And when those two forces converge, the thing that can't make more of it should go up substantively in price versus the thing that you can just willy nilly create as many as you want.
Absolutely. Only 21 million Bitcoin. Um, and it also
Well, and substantively less than 21 million, because it's been estimated that something on the order of at least 3 to 4 million of those have been irretrievably lost.
amen to that.
So we're probably at something like 17 million in real world. What is it possible to access uh, for Bitcoin?
Yeah, that I don't think enough about that, and it is so true. Just like what how many people have forgotten their seed phrases, especially whenever Bitcoin was valued at a lot less. That's it's fascinating to think about the dead Bitcoin out there. There's also, it my mind is blown away too, like this whole narrative of the interest rates of the central banks of the developed economies, the Euro Central Bank, the Federal Reserve in the United States, and that their interest rates are around 3 to 5%, as if like the transactional like gas burn of 3 to 5% is going to be um, getting rid of is going to be soaking up or creating enough dollars to be burned to be stashed back away to pay off this debt. Um, I looked at Argentina. I told you I was going to be digging into Argentina. Argentina was at over 133, or not over, at 133% on their benchmark interest rate, and it did not have that much effect on the price inflation that was going on there. And it's so interesting to me that the market, the stock market, um, New York Stock Exchange, whatever, CME, et cetera, that pays so much attention to the federal funds rate of the Federal Reserve and the European central bank's rate, and a couple more, the Japanese, and et cetera, are so concerned about a quarter of a percentage rate at 5%. And it seems to me that is not soaking up enough dollars that have been created. So who knows? You mentioned that's all that I have to say about it, is that I expect there to be more and more dollars, and I wish that people would pay. When they say Bitcoin's going to be worth $1 million, I want to know, like, 1 million of how many, um, which to me is like gets to the actual, like, the value and use case of Bitcoin is fleshing that question out. But I
Well,
don't
I think they are kind of factoring that in when they say a million, because it's saying, hey, we expect to see significant increase in the monetary supply. And so at 2030, we're talking about, well, how many dollars will there be and what will it be worth in terms of dollars? So I think that is getting factored in with, the more sophisticated analysis of people that are looking at Bitcoin, and I think that's also why there's a strong prediction that other asset classes that have these relatively low growth properties with respect to the dollar, something like maybe gold or silver or something like that, that there's predictions that those assets will also raise consummately according to the dollar, because the dollar may be headed for significant decline as predicted by many analysts, just based on the fact that the US doesn't seem to be getting their fiscal house in order. But then there's other things that are on the horizon. If the US significantly embraces crypto, and then the dollar continues to be the stable coin that everybody wants to trade to, you could see a massive influx of holding of dollars, because this is how the entire crypto market might trade against that. So still could be interesting things that could happen over the next few years that may keep the dollar afloat for some period of time, but who knows. But I think the analysis that I've seen has at least tried to factor that stuff in when they say that the price is going to be something very high, because they're looking at what the U.S. is doing with the continued creation of new dollars, and that if you price Bitcoin according to the monetary supply that it will be in various years, you can have a decent estimate of what it might be just based on those factors.
Yeah. Another thing, maybe slightly related. I have a house in Colorado, and I noticed that my property tax actually decreased for
Well,
this year.
good for you. That's never happened to me.
Well, I mean, good, or when I think about what's going on there, because the price of everything seems to be increasing, and so how is the state of Colorado accommodating for that? And
Weed sales,
uh,
probably.
no, the weed sales are that part of the budget is, or that windfall part of the political deal in Colorado is that money goes towards education. That's that's why, like, the schools.
But all money kind of sloshes around, right? I mean, so if you have a massive growth of the bottom line in one spot, it can take pressure off something else, right? I mean, it can act as a valve. I'm not saying it directly goes towards it, but like, if you have one part of your budget and you have massive inflows there, and you're like, well, we don't really need to have an increase on something because we have this money that goes somewhere else. In my state, property taxes largely goes towards paying for schools and that other kind of stuff. So that's where, if we were to start seeing significant revenues from the legalization of marijuana, which we did recently, um, you might see some of the pressure come off of the continuous increases in property taxes that we've had, because obviously things are getting more expensive. Since we have this inflation, that means teachers need to get paid more because their cost of living has gone up. And so you have this continuous treadmill of needing more revenue because we have an inflationary monetary supply. Everything's getting more expensive, so everything gets more expensive. So everything has to keep going up to offset that. And so, if we were to start seeing some of those massive inflows, then it might be, well, now we don't have to increase property taxes so much because we have this revenue stream that we never had before. It'd be interesting to see if we go through the same thing, but maybe there's a component of that.
Well, there, I would say, um, does your state have income tax? Do you have a state income tax?
We do. Yep.
See, to me, that's where Colorado's seeing a huge. The other, well, I guess there's also the money that's being distributed now from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is so funnily named. Uh, which money sent down to states for infrastructure projects, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, part of the reason that property tax is going down in Colorado is because income tax went up so much. Um, I don't know. I was surprised to find out that the property tax had gone down at all. That sort of shocked me. And of course, it can vary from county to county, area to area, town to town, blah blah blah. But I mean, part of why I'm so against an income tax at the state level is because it isolates the value of property. Um, and well, people can live outside of the state and own second homes there and not basically have a very cheap second home, and not be paying income in the state. Anyway, just something that I noticed and I've been thinking about was, I couldn't believe that, with the amount of money that we've been creating, um, that property tax had actually gone down. But anything else you want to talk about with Bitcoin, or do we want to talk about matrices and LLMs and NVIDIA?
I think we should talk about matrices and LLMs.
Okay, well, I don't know if you have that easily, that you could pull up with the
Yep,
regards
yep,
to
I'm pulling it up. I got it.
Sweet. What? Because I not a developer. I was trying to understand what this meant, and I do understand the notion of neural networks and matrices and the use of GPUs to compute those simultaneously, et cetera, et cetera. But um, is what is the claim of this paper, that now the matrices are no longer required for LLMs and the kernel can, how what is it saying, and do you believe it? I guess in short is what I want to know.
Well, so what this is saying, all right, yeah, let's back up for just a second and talk about what large language models are and how they're currently being used. Like, what is the way that they're put to use by our computing platforms? So a large language model, essentially what it does is it takes a whole bunch of statements. So like a question with a yes or no answer. So let's say I give you a picture and I ask you, is there a cat in this picture? And you say, there's a cat in this picture, yes or no. And you do that on a massive scale. So that is language model training, right? So it's essentially putting together a bunch of things like that. Like you have a question and then it gives you a yes or no answer. And you do this at a massive scale. And if you do that, what you find is that you can process that data in a certain way to allow you to do predictive text. So what you're doing with ChatGPT is there is this whole body of knowledge that's been processed. So all of the things that have been written on the internet, everything in books, all of this stuff has been processed in a certain way such that now you can, through sort of a chat style interface, talk to a large language model that will try to predict what the answer to the question that you're asking or the statement that you're making, what should be the appropriate response based on all this data that it's been given. The mechanism for doing that has been to use parallel computing. And this is where GPUs really shine. GPUs, fundamentally, what they were intended to be used for was to produce graphics for computer games. And if you're going to produce graphics for computer games, what you need to be able to do is put stuff on a screen. And the challenge with putting stuff on a screen is you need to generate an entire screen full of pixels, right? So your screen is broken down into a series of small squares, and those small squares all need to have a specific color on them. And if you make all of those colors appropriately, then you get something that looks like something to the human eye. And that's how computer graphics work, right? So fundamentally, what's happening is you have some polygons and textures or whatever that are represented mathematically, and then what you're doing is you're using the graphics card to produce a view into that. So there's a camera. The camera is looking at a specific scene, and then it uses a variety of techniques to produce an entire screen of data in various colors that to your eye will look like something, I don't know, like Zelda, or some kind of shooter game, or whatever it is that you're looking at. And the way it does this is to break it down into chunks of the screen and to give that to the massively parallel computer interface, which is your graphics card, that allows you to do these massively parallel operations. Because if you're going to see all of the pixels on your screen rendered in a certain way, then each of those pixels need to be rendered, and essentially they're all independent operations, and they can be done in parallel. So if you can massively scale up the number of things that you can do at once, and then give it all in one chunk, and then get it back from the computer and get it on the screen, and you can do that at a really high clip, then you can render your video game at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second or whatever. So this is what graphics cards have been traditionally doing. Well, large language inference models needed that same kind of a thing. If you're going to generate a bunch of tokens for a sentence, you can break it up in a similar fashion. So you can say, hey, we need to process all of the different pieces of this question or query that you've given me, and I need to go and look in the data set that I've got to try and produce a response. And so this has been the technique that has been used, and it meant that if you wanted to do AI in the way that has gotten really popular over the last year, which is large language models, then you needed access to graphics cards to be able to do this. And the graphics cards have been used for various other things as well. So you can do it for things like video processing, signal processing. So these cards have been very popular for a variety of applications. And what that meant is that NVIDIA, as one of the big providers of these types of cards, has had their stuff in demand. So sort of NVIDIA has gotten to ride a couple of different waves. So probably the first wave that they caught was just people using it for gaming. And then the next ride that they got was people were using the graphics cards for doing crypto mining for Ethereum. But then that went away, and then the graphics cards started getting used for running these LLMs. Well, what this paper says is the thing that these LLMs were using the graphics cards for, which is matrix multiplication. So if you've ever learned this in school in your linear algebra class, a matrix is like solving a set of linear equations. So like you have three equations with three variables, and you want to find an x, y, and z that satisfies this linear equation. Like you can do that with matrix operations. And essentially the LLM uses matrix multiplication to figure out what the answer to your question should be. Like if you look at the underlying math, that's ultimately how it's working. Well, what this paper talks about is a way to do LLMs without using matrix multiplication. And what that means is that you can do this with a different type of processor. And so they're contemplating in this paper, and actually somebody said that they demonstrated it. So this was shown to be correct, or that they could do it with a different type of processor called a field programmable gate array, or an FPGA. Now, these have gotten really popular lately because what a field programmable gate array allows you to do is to have essentially a dynamic computer. So a lot of emulators, a lot of different computer systems can be modeled using an FPGA. And these got really popular with things like Pocket Analog and Mr. FPGA, which are video game emulator systems, but they're not emulators. Essentially, what they're using the FPGAs for is they're programming them to be the types of computers that existed at a certain point in time. So let's say you had a Nintendo Entertainment System, or you had a Sega Genesis. Using an FPGA, you can perfectly model one of those systems and then run a ROM through it so that you exactly have the hardware that existed. So the way this works is you load a certain type of data into the FPGA. It models the computer so that it has the exact instruction set that existed at the time, and it behaves exactly the way that that computer behaved as the physical chipset did. Now, you can do tricks and stuff that allow it to run faster, and you can do certain other types of really cool techniques that make the FPGA even better. But for the sake of what we're talking about today, is that the FPGA can be used to do LLM type operations, obviating the need for a GPU. And the really interesting thing is that FPGAs use way less electricity. So using this paper's technique, that was actually demonstrated that you could do LLM style operations with significantly less power. So sort of the key sentence in this is right here. They processed a billion parameter scale model with 13 watts. Uh, that is crazy. That is absolutely insane, because the amount of power usage on a GPU processing a similar type of thing is probably like several orders of magnitude bigger than this, probably 1,300 watts or maybe 13,000 watts. So this is such a significant decrease in the amount of power that if this can be demonstrated and be found to be correct, NVIDIA better watch out, because like there's not going to be this need for all of these GPUs. And if this ends up being right, and somebody like Tesla can use these instead, then they'll probably be canceling that $1 trillion order or whatever that they had said that they were going to place with NVIDIA. And this might be, Jensen Huang signing that girl's bra. It might be the top signal.
Wow. So two questions. Have you seen any reflection in the NVIDIA price with regards to this news? Or is it too obscure right now? And secondly, like who is the king of making
Well, look at the date, brother. I mean, this was just published. Like, this is as breaking as it gets. Like, this is top news. Like, this is not something that's been out for a while. Like, this is posted on June 4th. This is as cutting edge as you can get.
Gotcha. I just looked at the date. I wasn't sure. You throw so much at me. It's been a fast morning for me. Well, what about FPGA chips? Who makes FPGA chips?
That I don't even know. I haven't extensively looked into like how these are, manufactured at scale. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's our old friend, TMSC. Seems like all the chips on the planet are created by them. I don't know how that ever ended up being the case, because it used to be that the U.S. was a leader in semiconductor creation. We had Intel, we had Texas Instruments. We had all kinds of different chip manufacturers that were in the U.S., and then we exported that technology off to different distant lands, and that no longer happens. So I really don't know the answer to that question, honestly.
Well, we do have the CHIPS Act bringing back chip manufacturing, especially I know in Arizona. Austin had a couple of semiconductor industries there too.
Yeah, the
Um,
key to the semiconductor industry is really just sand, access to the right type of sand. Silicon Valley, like, it was because we had the right type of silicon. Like, you got to be sitting on the right pile of raw materials to be able to make this stuff. And yeah, you're right. The U.S. Just happens to be sitting on the right type of raw materials that are needed to be able to create this stuff. And I hear you. I think it's TMSC that's actually making the plant in Arizona, right? If I recall correctly.
I'm not sure. I don't follow. I didn't realize that the access to sand was that, or the right kind of sand was that crucial to it. There's so much. Well, there's a lot of sand to be found everywhere. Um, but is
Nope,
Arizona?
nope. It's not the right. It's no. You got to have the right kind of sand. Even sand for concrete. You got to have the right kind of sand, because if you use the wrong sand, I guess it significantly changes the structural integrity of of concrete. And there's actually starting to be quite a sand shortage worldwide. I don't know if had you heard that at all?
Well, only because I was a sand volleyball player. It's is I have a lot of knowledge about different types of sand from that. Whenever we would build courts, there's actually a high silica grade sand that we would be looking for. It's the best type of sand. You don't want gravelly sand. You don't want granity sand, et cetera, et cetera. but I haven't paid that much attention to it. I haven't called around for question as to how much a truckload of sand costs for quite some time. Um, but
I guess we'll just keep throwing stuff on the screen here in case people don't know about this. But this is a good article, you know, about what is going on with sand shortage. This is kind of an older one. You know, this goes all the way back to 2017. But like, really, what it boils down to is um, there are different applications of sand, and not all sand is created equal. So sand is different. You know, we at a macro level, or you know, we're sort of walking on a beach, or you know, we're kicking around in the forest or whatever, we may think of sand all being relatively the same, but sand has different composition, and there's different utilities of sand because underlying, you know, like at the fundamental level, like what is that sand composed of is different in different parts of the globe and different parts of the United States. So some sand is clay, some sand is silicon, some sand is whatever. And so ultimately you want the right kind of sand for the right kind of usage. And if you're going to make a semiconductor, then you need silicon based sand, and that doesn't exist everywhere, and you can't just get any kind of it. And even if you do have high silicon sand, it might be have a lot of other things that are right next to it that make processing that sand expensive in a way that makes it undesirable. So you really do need the right kind of sand for the right kind of application. And so I think like the two top usages of sand that are familiar to me are for using in concrete, and then for using in chip manufacturing.
well, I wonder too, what if it's possible to find high grade silica sand that has been compressed into metamorphic rock, so you can be mining it underground. Um, but who knows about that? Sand in rock deposits usually has to be along a beach somewhere. So maybe that's Utah, the edge of the former Great Inland Sea. Um, which, speaking of, I don't know. We want to talk more about sand, or can we get into water in Idaho?
Well, I think to just close off a couple of the things that we were talking about. So, this is what I had mentioned about uh, Taiwan Semiconductor. You know, obviously they're one of the big players. They're the manufacturer that's actually making the NVIDIA chips. So these are the guys that have been producing what NVIDIA has been selling, right? So when you go buy your NVIDIA 4090 or 3090 or whatever, you know, card you're buying from NVIDIA, it's actually TSMC that is manufacturing it. And this has been happening in South Korea mostly, but with the CHIPS Act, they have been trying to draw some of the chip manufacturers back to the US. And so this one has been in process since, looks like the date was 2020. And I know from my understanding of the reason that they wanted to put that plant there is because it's sitting right next to a nuclear reactor. They have access to crazy cheap power in Arizona because they've got that nuke plant that is essentially right next to where they're going to put this chip plant.
Well, I also looked up what high grade silica sands metamorphic counterpart is, and it is quartzite. And we do have a massive amount of quartzite in the Rockies, uh, uh, along the northern side of the Mogollon Rim, in that whole. Um, I mean that the Colorado Plateau has a ton of quartzite. So I wonder if it's possible to be crushing up fairly economically and finely quartzite to be extracting high grade silica sand. Um, who knows? Or yeah, because the problem with high grade silica sand too is it blows. It blows. It's very, very light. Um, so
Well,
I don't.
we've talked about this a lot about just how big the United States is and how hard this is to contemplate for even people that live here, but around the world, I think it's even harder to understand how big the United States is. Like when we think about something, we think, oh, driving 3 hours is no big deal, and doing it on, a car, where most people would say driving 3 hours is a, you would probably cross multiple different countries. And in the United States, you can drive 3 hours and not even leave most states. They're that big. And so, what natural resources does the United States have? It just reminded me of this, where all of a sudden somebody's just digging in the ground in Pennsylvania and finds a massive lithium source, which is crazy important for the EV industry, right? And for just battery production in general. I think it was the case where Australia, I think, had most of the lithium deposits that were being used for a lot of the EV manufacturing. But with this find in Pennsylvania, like, here you go, like this could be the lithium source that is used for a lot of the battery technology that we'd be producing, in the U.S. So if we're saying U.S. as quartzite and U.S. as lithium, I mean, having access to raw materials is extremely important. Like that's the stuff that goes into making the stuff that people care about in the modern world. And so if this is going to be batteries and robots and chips, then there you go. Like the U.S. is probably sitting on the stuff that's needed to make that stuff.
Well, and I'm glad to see the CHIPS apps and bringing some sort of manufacturing back to the United States. On lithium, two things. One, I would imagine that we have lithium deposits near the Franklin Mountains in East Texas, southern New Mexico, and I say that because I know that lithium, it's impossible to get rid of the lithium in the groundwater, a problem that El Paso has had for some time. Although supposedly there's some great deposit of lithium somewhere around there, and yet nobody can seem to figure out where it's at. Um, but also, Mexico recently nationalized their lithium. I don't know if you heard about Elon Musk going to Mexico to try to seal a deal for the use of lithium for Tesla batteries, but he went to Mexico, then he went to Buenos Aires, went down to Argentina to also try to secure lithium from Argentina. I didn't pay that much attention to the buzz about whether he signed anything with Malay, but I know that Mexico turned him down. Yeah, and we have quartzite everywhere. It'll be interesting to find out if it's possible. One, because I also like think about, say, White Sands, New Mexico. Like I would guess that White Sands, just from like having been there, having seen it, and also again like looking for high grade silica sand whenever I was a volleyball player. Those are the best courts that you can get. You really sink down into them when they dry out really quickly. Yada yada yada. But I would guess that New Mexico has in the White Sands area. I would guess that that's high grade silica sand, and again, because there's so much exposed quartzite in the Rockies, you would think that maybe even have you ever been to Mount Blanca in outside of Alamosa, Colorado? There's the Great Sand Dunes there.
I've never been there. No.
It's worth a visit. I bet Rusty's been there. He didn't live that too far away from it, but I don't know. Those seem more of a granite based sand to me, just off of having touched and felt and been there before. But white sands, I would guess, gets a lot closer to silica. But enough of conjecture. I want to talk about water. We got 10 more minutes. Have you seen the news of water in Idaho?
No, should we? Well, I saw that there was a road that got washed out. I mean, I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
Oh, I did see a road got washed out. Was that in the
Why don't
Grand
you shoot me a
Teton?
link and I'll throw something on the screen? You got something you're particularly thinking about, at least so people can
Um,
follow along.
just sure. I'll send you a link. I'll send it to you. The road that got washed out, yes, was over on the it may be in Wyoming, it may be in Idaho. It's on the in between the Grand Targhee, and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So bad news for Jackson right now, as a lot of people who actually work in Jackson drive over the pass. I saw a picture of that. looked like a massive mudslide, but it also looked like they could divert the road and build a it's on a massive mud slope, so that which hasn't slid, they can move the road over for now, and they'll just have to slow down for a couple of turns. Here we go. I'm sending you an article from the Idaho Statesman. I'll put it in your signal. Pull that up. Although actually it has a paywall. Long story short, and what I more wanted to talk about was groundwater. You can get past the paywall too. In Twitter, I woke up this morning and there's a lot of hemming and hawing about the state of Idaho shutting off water to farmers. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. One, this is for junior rights for groundwater. And one thing that we see, like in Colorado, Rusty, and I always go back to Colorado, but Colorado is a very interesting state with regards to water rights because it was pirates of another sort went and established the state of Colorado, which is to say gold miners in 1850. And so it wasn't a top-down assessment of things like water rights in Colorado. It was a ground-up, haha, pun intended, a bunch of citizens of the Ohio and eastward of the original colonies, etc., that went out into the unincorporated western lands to dig for gold, and in doing so established the system of water rights that we see largely across the West, certainly along the Colorado River. This groundwater that got shut off is not on the Colorado River, but on the Snake River. But they also stick to the same concepts of water rights there. And those water rights in the West are usually based on surface water. And before a time whenever it was that feasible to be drilling and digging so many wells, the long and short of it is water rights are based on both beneficial use, and is actually the chief most concern, and then are given like a history, and first in time is first in right is the short sort of concept of when people got to an area earlier, which is to say if you stuck a pipe in a stream in Colorado or anywhere in the West, somebody went around and recorded that, and the earliest people are the ones who have to shut off their water last whenever there's a drought. So junior rights go to this notion of usually like after 1924, which was the date of a Colorado River Compact and the notion of sharing water between the states. But junior rights are number one, come in very late to the game, probably like in the 1960s and 1970s. But is also a lot of these junior rights were people who went around and said, well, I can drill a hole in the ground and have access to groundwater. And they seem to operate on this notion that sucking water out of the aquifers underneath all of these lakes and streams was a different paradigm, a different source of water than the surface water that was running through the streams in the West. And it's no surprise to me. It's very interesting to see all these farmers also scratching their heads and moaning about their water being shut off whenever both they were late to the game, and I would say the truer narrative is that they're stealing from people with earlier surface rights. So I would keep an eye on that, because we have seen an over appropriation of water in the West. We've long known that it was going to be that it was coming to a head, and that people were going to be fighting over water. So I just think it's important to both understand that the fight for water in the Western states is at a fever pitch. the lower states of California, Mexico actually at the end of Baja California, they haven't had any water for years, and the federal government recently paid California and Nevada, I think it was $13 billion for the amount of water that they quote unquote had rights to, but have been sucked up by farmers further upstream and by municipalities, et cetera, from pipes they stick in the ground. In Las Vegas, they have like 30-inch pipes, 30-inch wells dug to 6,000 feet into the ground. So I don't know if any of that's interesting to you, but it's very interesting to me that Idaho has begun to address this and actually went out and shut off or curtailed the groundwater usage there. So I think I'm almost certain we'll see that. We will just about have to see that in other states, especially California. The Imperial Valley in California is also very over appropriated on their water, and we will probably see more things like this occur. So,
Groundwater usage is massively fascinating to me. It feels like a bank account that we've been drawing from that is quickly going to run out. I think a lot of places have overutilized groundwater, and that I've seen things that say, Atlanta is just about to run out of water. I think Mexico City, I saw something else that said they're about to run out of water. So I think there are places on the planet where when we had lower populations, it was okay to use up a bunch of water. I also saw some stuff about how we're growing alfalfa in places we really shouldn't have been growing alfalfa and then selling off the alfalfa, which is essentially just like exporting the water. As someone who lives very close to massive amounts of fresh water, there are treaties that have been signed that say that the fresh water can't be sold off, it can't be pipelined out. So groundwater has been sort of a crutch that many places have used that I don't think is sustainable. I think water is something everybody's got to pay very close attention to. If you're not living in an area that's water rich, you could be in a troublesome spot if all of a sudden you run out of water. Humans tend to not live very long if they don't have access to clean water.
Well, there's other things about water that I find fascinating in a monetary space, because water comes in a cycle, and I mean, just like there can be massive banks and other corporations, companies, individuals that have a massive reservoir of cash, you can also have unseen reservoirs of water, but also people like that have both a limit to them and are very dependent on the rates that are drawn from them. In the high plains on the other side of the Continental Divide, so and everywhere from South Dakota all the way down to the Permian Basin in Texas, or Lubbock. We'll just roughly say Lubbock, Texas. There's a massive reservoir there called the Ogallala Reservoir, but the Ogallala has been drawn down in some places over 200 feet. I was talking with a town in Oklahoma with the city manager probably a year and a half ago, and he said that their wells were already sucking air, and that they were unable to drill down into deeper aquifers underneath it. I forget the name of the aquifer underneath it. It doesn't come to mind right now. But because of the lead content in that water and the different rock strata that it was dispersed through. And so, the narrative of unlimited water in places like Texas, and this is also, like, I grew up on a farm in Texas, where in Texas, you have the right to draw, and there's been this notion of unlimited water. And it's been interesting to me to think about the difference of that concept and where it began with windmills, wind-powered machines to pull water up from a straw from the ground, and how that is how that's a lot different than having electric pumps and circle sprinklers that pool water. a lot larger amount of water than the wind could ever pull up. So it's a problem that we're going to see not just in the Western United States, but also in the Great Plains. Maybe not such an issue. I'm surprised to hear Atlanta, because to me, when I go back east, there's like water everywhere, and it seems like overhead water management is more of the issue. But yeah, there's a water only comes so fast, and if we're drawing and sending it, the other thing that's amazing to me is part of the political fallout of this notion of unlimited amount of water is that you send it down to the river faster. Instead of building more dams along the Colorado, as it becomes a fight by larger political entities, hashtag Los Angeles and Las Vegas, that want to see that water sent down to them. It's more about like get rid of all the dams and the holding mechanisms up above them. And that to me is very short-sighted understanding of the problem, because if we're holding more and more buckets and reservoirs of water in the higher elevations, then it can increase the amount of water that's reintroduced into the water table down below ground. Anyway, we're over the hour. That's all.
We're over the hour. And just to close off one subject, like look at that green candle on the on the day there. So it's interesting thing that we were talking about Bitcoin and sort of not being able to breach a certain price, and it looks like maybe today is the day we're gonna rip well above it. So watch out if you're looking at the price of Bitcoin. You might see an interesting day ahead if any of this situation from Luke turns out to be correct, and if this situation starts to breach today, maybe we'll have been timely about talking about this.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to both point it out, and at some point it's gonna break above at some point. And there's also these notions of psychological barriers. Very interesting that 70,000 and round numbers, lots of zeros seem to be such psychological barriers. Once it rips beyond that, like who knows what happens for a while. That's all I got. Enjoyed it, Grant.
Thanks so much. We'll talk soon. See you guys tomorrow on FOMO.
All right. Bye-bye.